"You're not allowed in the house until you apologize." That sentence didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came the way a judge reads a sentence, calm, final, and already written. I stood on the porch of the house I'd lived in for 40 years. The paint on the railing was the same pale blue my husband had chosen before he passed, a shade meant to keep the ghosts out. Turns out the ghosts were family. Across from me stood my son's wife, Clara, mid-30s. Immaculate as always. Her tone didn't waver. "We've talked about this, Marlene. You crossed a line." My son, Evan, hovered behind her, hands in his pockets, head bowed like he wished he were anywhere else. "I brought the boxes," I said, pointing to the 2 cardboard containers by my feet. "You said you wanted to look through them. Old photos, your father's journals, your school drawings." Clara folded her arms. "You went through our storage room without permission. That's not your space anymore." Our storage room." The phrase landed heavy. Once, this entire place had been mine, the creaky floors, the lilac bushes Walter planted, the attic that smelled of cedar and thyme. But after he died, I let Evan add his name to the deed to simplify things. Taxes, paperwork, the kind of kindness that grows teeth later. I tried again, softly. "I wasn't invading. I was preserving. Your father kept his uniform spotless for 40 years. I thought maybe your daughter might want to see who he was." Clara's laugh was short, sharp. "She doesn't remember him, and nostalgia isn't an excuse for trespassing." Evan still didn't look at me, not even once. So I nodded, lifted one of the boxes and set it gently at the edge of the porch. "I'll go," I said, "but I won't apologize for loving a house that raised us." Clara turned away. "Then you're not welcome back." The sun was dipping low, painting the cul-de-sac gold and quiet. I looked once at the curtains in the window, the ones I'd sewn myself, and felt something inside me settle. By evening, I'd contacted a realtor. The listing process would start before the streetlights came on. Sometimes, letting go isn't punishment. It's freedom disguised as loss. I bent down slowly, my knees creaking like old timber, to pick up the second box. Not a word from Evan, not a flicker of recognition. As I stepped off the porch, I glanced toward the living room window, the one where Walter used to sit every morning, pencil tucked behind his ear, muttering at the crossword. The curtains were different now. So was the furniture. Nothing of him remained in that room. I walked back to my car, still parked under the sycamore tree we'd planted when Evan turned 10. The same driveway I'd driven up for 40 years, only now it felt foreign, borrowed. I didn't cry. Not when I reversed down the drive. Not when I passed the mailbox I used to paint every Christmas. Not even when I saw the row of lavender bushes Walter had planted for me still purple, still alive, still patient. But something inside me shifted, something that had waited too long to stand up for itself. By the time I reached the main road, my decision had already hardened like cooling wax. They wouldn't need to worry about banning me from that house because by sundown it wouldn't be theirs anymore. That's how it began. Not with shouting or betrayal, but with a quiet sentence on a porch from someone who thought time had made me harmless. I was 62, not broken. And I still remembered how to draw a line and cross it. The kitchen felt smaller when I returned to my rented cottage across town. Too still, too neat, as if pretending to be lived in. I set the boxes down on the table and just stood there, palms on the cardboard, breathing through everything I didn't say. Finally, I sat by the window, the chair that creaked the same way Walter's knees used to. Outside, the oak tree in my yard had begun shedding its first leaves. I reached into the box and pulled out a photo. Evan at 10, missing a front tooth, grinning so wide the joy spilled out of the frame. My handwriting on the back. Evan's birthday. Chocolate cake. Windy day. I held it tight. Not because it was valuable, but because it was proof that once, this family had belonged to me too. Everything I'd loved, everything I'd built, had been reduced to a sentence. That I'd cooked and scrubbed and worried and worked, patched roofs and hearts, paid bills on time, and stayed through every long night of sickness and silence. And now, you're not allowed in the house. I moved to the kitchen and made myself tea, not because I wanted it, but because habit fills the space where purpose used to live. The kettle hissed softly. I watched the flame quiver beneath it, blue and sharp, like a question I wasn't ready to answer. When Walter died, it was a Tuesday afternoon. Sudden. A stroke, the doctor said. One minute he was sitting beside me, chuckling at the crossword, and the next his spoon clattered to the floor. I'd held his hand until the paramedics took him, but the moment the door shut behind them, the air itself felt colder, like grief had stolen the oxygen. After that, I drifted. Neighbors came and went. Casseroles appeared and vanished. Evan helped with the bank papers, insurance, taxes. He was thoughtful back then, or maybe I just needed to believe he was. The house grew quieter, not empty, just thinner, like it was holding its breath. So, I filled the days with motion. I went back to tutoring at the local school, volunteered at the library, knitted hats for the hospital nursery. It wasn't joy, but it was rhythm. Then Clara entered the picture. Smart, organized, beautiful, and utterly uninterested in anyone's history but her own. From the beginning, she treated me like a footnote in Evan's story, something she meant to edit out. I tried to stay kind, to step lightly, to be grateful for being invited to birthdays and holidays. Even when she painted over the mural Walter had spent 3 weekends on, the one in our granddaughter's room, I said nothing. Because Evan looked happy, because their little girl laughed, because I thought kindness might be enough. But kindness isn't a contract. It doesn't get you in writing, and it certainly doesn't get you through your own front door. I carried my tea back to the table and stared at the boxes again. Each photograph, each letter, each trinket had a weight, not sentimental but earned. They wanted an apology. For what? For remembering? For refusing to disappear? A knock at the door broke my thoughts. My breath caught. Then I stood. It was Donna, my neighbor for nearly 30 years, the kind of friend who still brought me tomatoes in the summer and called me Mar like we were both still 25. "I saw you pull in," she said, holding out a small box. "Peach cobbler. Just came out of the oven." "Donna," I said, my voice thinner than I meant it to be, "you always show up when the world collapses." She smiled, eyes sharp with knowing. "You look tired." "I am. Want to talk about it?" "Not yet." "Then eat first. Talk later." She patted my arm, turned, and walked back across the lawn, steady, familiar, a kind of comfort no apology could buy. Inside, my kitchen hummed with silence. The cobbler's sweetness filled the air, heavy and warm, like memory refusing to leave. I pressed the button on the answering machine. One message. "Hi, Grandma," said Lila, Evan's daughter. "Dad said you weren't feeling well. I just wanted to say I love you. Call me if you need anything." Not feeling well. I almost laughed. That's how they'd chosen to rewrite it already. Too bad for them, I still own the pen. Walter and I bought this house in 1981, a spring so green it hurt to look at. It cost more than we could afford, and came with every problem you could name. Leaky roof, stubborn plumbing, a porch that sagged like it was sighing. But it was ours. We'd signed the papers with trembling hands and wild hope. Walter carried me over the threshold because he said if we were going to be broke, we might as well be cinematic about it. The linoleum peeled up in the kitchen, and I remember him on his knees with a hammer, trying to nail it flat while I stood there with a grocery bag full of canned soup and one cheap bottle of wine. "We'll fix it, Marlene," he'd said. "We'll fill it with our lives." And we did. In one of the boxes, I found his old notebook: replace gate latch, tighten laundry valve, plan anniversary weekend, call florist. His handwriting looked tired but alive. I closed the notebook and looked around the kitchen. The chipped tiles, the mismatched knobs Walter insisted had character, the sunlight cutting across the table at 4:10 every afternoon, none of it was perfect, but every inch was ours. They weren't just keepsakes. They were evidence. I was here. I lived here. And now they wanted to evict me from my own life, as if I were a tenant whose lease had run out. When Evan was 9, he broke his arm falling off the swing Walter built in the backyard. Walter was working late that night, and I carried Evan to the car myself, his little arm wrapped in a dish towel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give out before we reached the hospital. 40 miles to the nearest ER that took our insurance. He cried into my sweater the whole way. I remember reading silly jokes from a wrinkled highlights magazine to keep him from sobbing. Evan doesn't remember that night, or he pretends not to. What he does remember is that I kept too many boxes, wore shoes that had seen better years, and still used a flip phone. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being the center of his world and became its inconvenience. I thought I'd been careful, thought I'd stepped back enough, given him space to live his own life. But maybe mothers don't fade gently. Maybe we're meant to be erased. The paperwork was still in the drawer of my old desk. Title held jointly. Tenancy in common. Signed and notarized. It was meant to make things easier after Walter died. Evan offered to handle the taxes. I was too numb, too tired to argue. The lawyer said it was safe I'd keep my rights. Nothing would change. For a while, that was true. Then came the renovations. Evan's idea. The kitchen, he said, needed a modern touch. I paid for half, then more than half, then all of it. I told myself he'd visit more if the house felt like home to him. Turns out, he wasn't building a bridge, he was building an alibi. Last year, I mentioned selling. Downsize, maybe move to a quiet community near the lake. Evan said no. Too complicated. Too risky. You're safe here, Mom. Safe. I'd never realized a cage could sound so polite. I looked around, the scratched table where we'd played dominoes, the curtains faded to softness, the floorboards that sang under every step. This house didn't need saving, it needed release. I opened the drawer. The deed, the notary seal, the realtor's card, the one Evan once suggested but I never called. I laid them out beside the untouched cobbler. I didn't need anyone's permission. I only needed my own. The banker's name was Hal Bennett, a man in his 30s with kind eyes and the posture of someone raised to stand when elders entered the room. When I stepped into the branch that morning, wearing the same navy coat I'd worn to Walter's funeral, he rose from his chair as if greeting someone important. "I'd like to make some changes regarding the deed to my property," I said, "and I'd prefer to speak with someone who understands joint ownership law here in Oregon." He blinked once, then nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Ellis. Let's step into the conference room." Oh. I'd come prepared, manila folder in hand, everything neatly arranged. The original title, 5 years of tax records, insurance letters, and the updated property assessment from when we'd added the new siding and other of Evan's projects. One I'd paid for in full. Hal reviewed each page carefully, his pen gliding quietly as he made notes. When his eyes reached the line naming Evan Ellis as co-owner, he paused. "Has there been a disagreement?" he asked gently. "Not really," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "Just clarity." He nodded, typing something into his computer. "Well, you're listed as tenants in common. That means your share is legally yours. You can sell your portion or the entire property if the other party consents. If he doesn't, you have legal recourse." "I'm not interested in a fight," I told him. "I just want to sell the house." "And your son?" he asked. "Will he agree to that?" I slid a paper across the table. "Here's every mortgage payment I've made since Walter died. Here's the loan I took out for Evan's graduate school. And here's the signed agreement giving me the right to remain in the home until I chose to sell or until my death, whichever came first." Hal read the clause carefully. "That helps," he said at last. "Technically, he can't stop the sale. He can challenge the value, but not your decision." "Good," I said. "Then I'd like a full appraisal. Expedite it. I'll cover the fee." He nodded, scribbling notes. "I can arrange that. But Mrs. Ellis, are you sure you want to sell your family home?" I looked him square in the eye. "I'm not selling a house, Hal. I'm selling the right they took to make me a stranger in it." He didn't reply, so I asked softly, "Hal, have you ever walked through your own kitchen and realized every drawer had been rearranged by someone else, sat at your table and felt like a guest?" He blinked once, then twice. And quietly he said, "No, ma'am, I haven't." I left the bank with a list of certified appraisers and an appointment set for Friday, 2 days from now. The air outside smelled faintly of asphalt and lilacs. I crossed the street to a small coffee shop, the same one where Walter and I used to split a blueberry muffin every Saturday. I sat by the window and ordered tea, though it was far too warm for tea. Old habits don't check the weather. Cars drifted past parents with strollers, delivery trucks, people heading somewhere that wasn't falling apart. My phone buzzed. A message from Evan. "Lila wants to stop by this weekend. She misses you. Can you please not make things awkward?" No greeting, no question of how I was, just an instruction: behave. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't seen in years, Marshall Graham, the lawyer Walter and I had used when we first wrote our will. His office was still listed online, Graham and Bell Law, Salem, Oregon. The receptionist picked up on the second ring. "Graham and Bell. How can I help you?" "My name is Marlene Ellis," I said. "I'd like to make changes to my estate plan, something swift and irreversible." A pause. "Irreversible?" "Yes. I'm not looking for second chances, only clean endings." We scheduled an appointment for Monday morning. Back home, I set my purse on the counter and stared again at the boxes, the notebooks, the photographs, the evidence of a life lived fully, if not perfectly. They'd said I couldn't come home until I apologized. They'd never imagined I'd sell it instead. No message from Evan the next day, no call, no text. He probably thought I was sulking. He never did understand how long I could stay quiet when I'd made up my mind. But this wasn't really about the house. It was about something smaller and more dangerous, the slow erasure of self that happens one polite dismissal at a time. Being talked over, being left out of plans. Watching family photos disappear from mantels, replaced by minimalist art that meant nothing. That was Clara's gift. Her power was soft, guilt-colored. She never said, "Don't listen to your mother." She said, "I'm just trying to make things easier for everyone." And Evan, God help him, mistook that for kindness. The first real crack appeared 5 years ago. Lila had just turned 16, and I'd offered to help with her first car, something small, safe, used. I'd been saving from a part-time job at the public library, cataloging old archives in the back room. Over coffee, I mentioned it to Clara. She smiled, that polished, pleasant smile of hers. "That's thoughtful, Marlene," she said, "but we're teaching Lila the importance of earning what she has." Noble words. Except the following week, they surprised her with a brand new Honda Civic in the driveway, bright silver with a bow. I wasn't angry that they didn't need my help. I was angry that they didn't want it. Walter used to say, "People stop listening to their mothers when they find someone who flatters them more efficiently." And he was right. Clara knew how to flatter. She'd look at Evan and say, "You're such a provider," with just enough softness to make it sound like devotion. And Evan, my thoughtful, steady son, bloomed under that tone like a sunflower turning toward light. And me? I became the shade. I stopped bringing over baked bread because no one ate it. Stopped offering to babysit when Lila hit middle school. They'd found a sitter with a degree in child development. Stopped giving birthday gifts they hadn't pre-selected. Every year, my presence took up less space. My words grew smaller. My name became an afterthought, until, finally, it shrank to a single command: apologize. For what? For loving too loudly? For remembering what they'd rather forget? No. Not anymore. The appraisers arrived that Friday morning. 2 women, young but careful. They walked through the house like it mattered, like history could still mean something. One paused in the hallway, staring at a framed photo of Walter in his uniform. "Your husband?" she asked. "Yes," I said softly. "He passed in 2009. She nodded. "He has kind eyes." That was the first kind thing anyone had said to me in weeks. They finished within the hour, promising a full report by Monday, the same day I'd meet with the lawyer. That evening I baked a blueberry pie, Walter's favorite. I ate one slice warm from the oven, barefoot in the kitchen. The sugar and lemon filled the air like forgiveness. And for the first time in years, I didn't set a second plate. Clara never shouted. That was her art. Her cruelty was dressed in politeness, her rejection wrapped in silk. It was never, "You're not welcome." It was, "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at home." Never, "You don't matter." Just, "Let's keep things simple this time." The first time I truly understood what Clara thought of me was the Christmas after Lila turned 11. I'd spent a week knitting her a scarf, soft gray wool, delicate lacework, a pattern I'd memorized back in the 80s. Lila opened it, blinked, and smiled politely. Before she could say a word, Clara laughed. "Grandma loves her little projects, doesn't she?" Just like that, the gift became something quaint, a relic, not a kindness. That night I found it draped over a chair, forgotten. I never knit for them again. There were hundreds of moments like that. Quiet slights that didn't cut deep but left bruises that never faded. Once, she corrected my grammar while I was reading a letter from Walter aloud. Another time, she rolled her eyes when I brought my own pie to Thanksgiving, saying it might have too much sugar for Lila. Her cruelty was dressed as care, soft, polished, perfectly plausible. And Evan? He'd laugh nervously, change the subject, or say, "She means well, Mom." But I knew better. You can feel it when someone's waiting for you to stop being needed. At first, I told myself it was a generational thing, that she didn't mean harm, just didn't understand what it meant to carry a household in your hands for 40 years. But that excuse wore thin, because at some point, it stopped being forgetfulness. It became erasure. I used to have a chair in their living room, an old armchair they'd borrowed from my den for their cozy nook. During visits, I'd sit there quietly, watching them talk, letting their laughter fill the space. Then one day, it was gone. When I asked, Clara smiled. It didn't match the new layout, but you can sit at the counter. So I did on a backless bar stool. 5 minutes later, I said I was tired and left. They never asked why. That's how it happens. Not with shouting, but with replacements. Your chair, your casserole, your stories, one by one, quietly removed. And when you finally say, "This hurts," they call you dramatic. But the day I dropped off those photo boxes, the ones they said took up too much space, and found myself locked out of my own house, I understood. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an eviction not from property but from my own story. I wasn't the matriarch anymore. I was an inconvenience. They never learned how to discard someone politely. So instead, they tried to starve me out with silence, with suggestions disguised as concern. And when that didn't work, they offered me a condition. Apologize. I suppose they thought I'd be afraid of losing the last corner of belonging I had left. But that was their mistake. I was never afraid of losing my place in their home. What terrified me was losing my place in my own story, and that fear had died a long time ago. I woke at 4:43 a.m. No alarm, no sound. The kind of waking that happens when your mind has already made a decision while you were asleep. The house was still, steeped in that heavy pre-dawn quiet that feels like it's holding its breath before something changes. I sat on the edge of the bed, feet on the cold wood floor, waiting for my hands to stop trembling. They didn't, but I stood anyway. No coffee, no radio, no routine, just me, walking through the dark toward the back porch. Outside, the air smelled faintly of rain. Salem's early mornings always carried that edge like the world hadn't fully decided to wake up yet. Somewhere, a dog barked. The neighbors' wind chimes moved without wind. The street lamps flickered through their last few moments of relevance before daylight replaced them. Walter once told me, "There's a difference between giving up and deciding you're done." He'd said it the day he quit a job that had chewed through his best years. I didn't understand him then. I do now. I wasn't giving up on my family. I was done auditioning for a part they'd already rewritten without me. The phone rang at 9 a.m. Sharp. The realtor I'd emailed the night before, Caroline Price. Middle-aged, steady voice. The kind that didn't flinch at hard truths. "When can I see the property?" she asked. By noon, she was standing in my living room, clipboard in hand. "This is a good space," she said, scanning the walls, the worn floor, the light filtering in through the curtains. "Solid bones, the siding's new. Last year," I said. "Paid in cash." She nodded. "You're serious about selling?" "As serious as cancer," I said before I could stop myself. Caroline didn't blink. "Then let's start today. You'll need a pre-inspection. I know a man. Photos by next week. We'll list quietly, first test the market." And just like that, it was happening. "Unless you want an open house right away?" Caroline asked, pen poised above her notes. "No open house," I said. "I want buyers who ask for it, not strangers coming to poke through my drawers." She smiled faintly. Understood. As we went through the paperwork, I found my eyes drifting around the living room. It was clean, but lived in. Nothing curated, nothing trendy, just honest pieces of a life. A life I'd thought I'd finish here. But I wasn't staying out of stubbornness or pride. I'd simply assumed I had more time. Time to be needed. Time to matter. Caroline asked if there were any restrictions she should know: title conflicts, liens, family disputes. I told her everything. About the joint ownership, about Evan, about the clause that gave me the right to sell. Her pen hesitated briefly. "He knows you're listing it?" "Not yet." She didn't comment, just tore a page from her pad and slid it toward me. "You call me," she said, "the second he does." That night, I started packing. Not everything, just one box. I labeled it things that belonged to me. Inside, I placed Walter's wristwatch. A photograph from our first year of marriage, his eyes still reckless, mine still certain, a book of poems I never lent to anyone, and the brass key to a house I was ready to release. Monday morning, Caroline returned with a man named Greg, late 40s, quiet leather notebook instead of clipboard. Pre-inspection, he said, shouldn't take more than an hour. I gave him the run of the place, watching from the kitchen as he moved gently through each room, tapping walls, checking under sinks, listening to the hum of outlets like a doctor measuring a pulse. I tried to busy my hands wiping the stove, folding a dish towel, but everything felt suspended, unreal. Every sound Greg made seemed to loosen something invisible, not violently, tenderly, as if the house itself had begun to let go of me. Caroline sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee I'd brewed out of habit. "I've got a couple in mind," she said. "He's a retired firefighter, she's a school nurse, 2 grown kids who still send cards." I smiled. She looked around the room, her voice soft. "Places like this are rare now. Houses with stories. Buyers feel it the moment they walk in. If this moment gripped, you hit subscribe and stay with Marlene Ellis as she takes back her life, one quiet, unstoppable choice at a time." "Sometimes stories wear people out," I said quietly. "My son's wife thinks history makes things cluttered." Caroline set her coffee cup down with care. "Well," she said, "history's what makes homes sell." Greg returned from his inspection, his notebook already closed. "A few notes," he said. "Nothing major. The foundation's good, roof solid, just some minor caulking in the upstairs bath. Easily handled." Caroline smiled. "We'll list it by Thursday quietly, like you asked. If the right offer comes, you ready to move fast?" I looked around the kitchen, the same kitchen where Walter once stood on Sunday mornings drinking orange juice and humming off-key. The spot by the stove where Lila dropped my wedding china when she was 8, the crack still visible in the tile, the cupboard with the loose hinge I'd never fixed because somehow it never seemed urgent enough. "I'm ready," I said. After they left, I walked through each room alone. Not to grieve, just to see. The living room still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. The hallway light still flickered when the dishwasher ran. In the back bedroom, I found a single slipper under the bed, one of mine, mismatched and worn thin. I sat on the floor and held it like a photograph. That's when it hit me, not as a thought, but as a truth that settled in my chest like an anchor. I had loved this house harder than anyone else ever would. That evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Lila. "Hey, Grandma. I was thinking, can I come by this weekend to grab those old yearbooks you mentioned for a school project?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "You're always welcome, sweetheart. Just don't wait too long." I didn't tell her the house might not be mine by then. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't want her to inherit the guilt her parents had earned. I pulled another empty box from the closet and labeled it "Going Forward." Inside, I placed the deed. By Wednesday afternoon, Caroline called. Her voice carried a hint of excitement. "You're not going to believe this. A couple toured the place this morning. Not an official showing, they just couldn't wait. They're from out of state, Oregon natives originally. Their son died 2 years ago, only child," Caroline said softly. "They've been looking for a place that feels like it held something real. Not new, not staged, lived in." Her words moved through me like warm water. "How soon would they want to close?" I asked. "End of the month, if you're willing." That gave me just over 2 weeks. I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me through the phone. "Yes," I said. "Let's do it." The next morning, the documents arrived in a thick manila envelope. I set them on the kitchen table, unopened, for nearly an hour. The air smelled faintly of coffee and dust, the kind that gathers around endings. When I finally sliced the envelope open, I used the same paring knife Walter once used to trim rose stems. Inside lay the purchase agreement. Clean, firm, unambiguous. 2 signatures stood between me and the life I'd built for 42 years. I signed. I didn't cry. Then I went to the hallway closet and pulled out the box labeled "Things That Belong to Me." I added 3 more items. A grocery list in Walter's handwriting, his neat cursive still confident. A cloth napkin with a faded stain from the last family dinner before Lila left for college. The small, rusted key to the garden shed Walter built by hand. Then I opened a new box and labeled it "Not Coming With Me." Into it went the Live, Laugh, Love wall hanging. Clara had insisted I hang to brighten the place. The factory-made apron Evan bought me one Mother's Day, still with its tag, and the lavender candle I'd always hated but kept burning because Lila had picked it out. That night, I made soup. Simple, quiet soup. No need for extra portions. No one expected. I lit a candle, not the gifted one, and sat down with a book. The doorbell rang halfway through my meal. I almost didn't answer. But when I did, Lila stood there, hoodie up, hair in a messy bun, eyes tired but kind. "Hey, Grandma," she said softly. "I know I should have called. I just didn't want to talk to anyone but you." I stepped aside. "Yearbooks?" She smiled faintly. "That and everything else." We sat at the table for hours. She asked about Walter, about the house, about the old recipe box she'd once raided as a little girl. When she finally looked around and whispered, "Is it weird I feel more at home here than I do with them?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "It's not weird at all." "Oh." Lila never asked why some of the pictures were missing from the walls. Maybe she already knew. The house didn't resist the packing like I thought it would. I expected the walls to hold their breath, the drawers to stiffen, every object to whisper, "Don't go," as I touched it. But they didn't. Everything yielded quietly, like even the house had accepted it was time. I started in the linen closet, old towels faded to gentleness, sheets worn thin in the middle. I kept 3 sets. Donated the rest. There was no one left to impress with matching pillowcases anyway. The kitchen was harder, not because of the things, but because of what they meant. The chipped teapot Walter gave me on our 10th anniversary, the casserole dish that had survived every Thanksgiving. A drawer full of plastic containers with missing lids. They weren't utensils, they were scaffolding. Pieces of structure I'd leaned on to make life look ordinary, even when it wasn't. I gave myself permission to cry once, kneeling on the kitchen floor, holding a coffee mug that still bore the faint outline of Walter's thumbprint in the glaze. He used that cup every morning for years. I never scrubbed it too hard, afraid I might wash him away. I wrapped it in a towel and placed it in a box labeled Mornings. The movers came that weekend, 2 local men, early 30s, one wearing a back brace, both kind and quiet. They called me ma'am until I asked them not to. They didn't pry, didn't comment on the boxes marked storage only. They loaded the few pieces I kept: my reading chair, a narrow desk, Walter's old rocker, and left the rest for donation pickup. I hadn't told Evan yet. Not officially. He hadn't reached out since the text about Lila's visit. Maybe he thought silence was safer. Maybe he hoped I'd let it all pass, file it under hurt feelings, and fade neatly back into my corner of the family. But the family had already shifted, not because I left, but because I stopped asking for a seat. Back in the same little rental on the edge of Salem, 1 bedroom, a creaking porch, and a garden wild with rosemary. When I stepped inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and rain. No ghosts, no arguments, no apologies owed. It was quiet, honest, empty, and finally mine. The first night, I sat on the porch of the little cottage, a mug of chamomile warming my hands, watching the wind move through the rosemary bush like it was combing hair. There were no streetlights, only moonlight and shadow. I didn't feel sad. I felt still, as if the noise of the world had stepped outside to give me room. The phone buzzed on the small table beside me. I reached for it without urgency. Dad saw the listing today. He's losing it, wants to talk. What should I say? I stared at the message from Lila, then typed back, "Nothing. Let him feel what he made." I set the phone down and let the wind keep moving. Lila came again the next Saturday, carrying a paper bag full of scones and a carton of orange juice. "For your fridge," she said. "It looks empty." "It is," I told her. "On purpose." She sat at the small table near the front window, her eyes roaming the space. "It's cute, quiet, smells like books and salt." That's the cedar shelves and the old heating vent," I smiled. "It'll settle." She hadn't mentioned the house. Neither had I. We talked about her classes, her internship, the boy she liked but wouldn't name. I let her lead the rhythm. She needed the calm more than I did. But eventually, her voice dropped. "They're angry, Grandma. Really angry." "Who? Your dad? Clara?" "Mostly Dad. They say it's not fair, that you blindsided them, that you're being dramatic." I sipped my tea. "They're entitled to their feelings." Lila frowned. Aren't you going to explain? Tell them why. I leaned back in my chair. Sweetheart, your father doesn't want an explanation. He wants me to undo something that makes him uncomfortable. That's not the same thing. She hesitated. He says you're trying to hurt him, that you're punishing him. I met her eyes. If I wanted to punish him, I'd have left him with the property taxes. Lila laughed, the kind that catches halfway between relief and guilt. I reached across the table and took her hand. I didn't do this to punish anyone. I did it to stop punishing myself. Her eyes softened. She blinked, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. This came in the mail, she said quietly, to the old house. Mom didn't want to bring it, so I took it, Lila said, handing me a large white envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside was a final notice from the bank: confirmation of sale, record of transaction, verification of funds transfer. Attached was a small yellow post-it note written in looping, unfamiliar script. We wish you peace in whatever comes next. I folded the letter neatly and set it aside. Will you tell them where the money's going? Lila asked quietly. Not unless they ask, I said. And if they do, I'll tell them what's theirs. Nothing more. I know. Later that afternoon, we walked through the little garden behind the cottage, overgrown, fragrant, alive in its own wild rhythm. Lila bent down, picked a handful of rosemary, and tied it with a ribbon she pulled from her backpack. For your new kitchen, she said. I placed it in a glass jar by the window, beside the old pie plate and the kitchen timer Walter used to wind every morning. That night, I called the bank. I'd like to open a trust, I told the manager, for my granddaughter. Full amount, long-term interest. Protected. He asked if I wanted to add any stipulations. Just one, I said. She never has to ask anyone's permission to use it. The next morning, at 8:17 a.m., the first message came. Evan. Mom, I saw the listing. We need to talk. Then came a call. I let it ring until it stopped. By 9, he'd left a voicemail. Hi, Mom. I don't know what's going on, but you can't just sell the house. That was the family home, my home. You didn't even discuss it with me. Please call me back. By noon, the messages turned sharper. You're being irrational. This isn't like you. What are you trying to prove? And then the one that said everything without saying much at all. You've really disappointed me. I sat on my small porch, lukewarm tea in hand, rereading that line. Not in anger, not even sadness. Just clarity. Because what he meant was, you didn't stay in the box we built for you. You climbed out. Without permission. I didn't reply. By evening, Clara had joined the chorus, her message long, structured, coldly polite. We understand you're hurt, but decisions like this affect everyone. You've destabilized the family structure. We expected more from you. I laughed. Not bitterly, not cruelly. Just honestly. The family structure she mourned was never balanced, just a bridge where the tolls only ever went one way. They'd never asked what I needed, how I felt, or if I was happy. They assumed silence meant contentment, that presence meant approval. But I wasn't a statue in the family photo. I was a person, and for once, I had acted like one. I ignored Clara's message too. That night, as the wind picked up outside and the cottage windows creaked gently in their frames, my phone rang again. Lila. They know about the trust, she said quietly. I closed my eyes. How? Dad went into a tailspin after the title transfer processed. He started checking bank alerts, probably hoping it was an error. The manager wouldn't say much, but he figured enough out. I didn't answer. They're furious, she continued. I've never seen them like this. Did they say anything to you directly? No, she hesitated, but they're different. Mom's cold. Dad keeps saying things like, this is what happens when loyalty breaks down. I exhaled slowly. You don't owe them a defense. I know. But it's hard, Grandma. I love them even when they're like this. I know, sweetheart. Silence lingered between us, gentle and heavy. Then Lila whispered, Did you do it for me? The trust? I did it for me, I said. And I included you, because you've always seen me. You've never made me small. There was another pause. Then she said, barely audible, Thank you. After the call ended, I finally listened to Evan's voicemail. He sounded tired, not angry, just bewildered. You didn't have to cut us out, Mom. I don't know what I did that was so unforgivable, but if this is really what you want, I guess there's nothing left to say. It wasn't unforgivable, I thought, just unforgettable. And there's a difference. I went to my small desk, pulled out a notepad, and began to write. Dear Evan, you didn't notice the last time I set the table for you. You didn't notice when I stopped offering. You never asked why I went quiet. You just appreciated the silence. You didn't do one big cruel thing, you did 100 small ones. And each time I forgave you without a word. That doesn't mean you didn't owe me one. Love isn't a debt, Evan, but respect is. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done giving myself away. Take care, Mom. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and tucked it quietly into the back of a drawer. Some truths aren't meant to be mailed. They're just meant to be written down so you can finally stop carrying them. The train eased out of the Salem station just past dawn. Not a grand departure, no flurry of goodbyes, just a soft lurch forward and the low hum of motion. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a thermos Lila had handed me that morning, chamomile, with a splash of honey. Where are you headed, Grandma? She'd asked. South, I said. Somewhere I don't have to explain myself. She didn't argue, just hugged me, slipped the tea into my bag and whispered, Send a postcard. Oh. The cottage had never been meant to last. Neither had the town. I knew that from the beginning. I hadn't fled to start over. I'd left to breathe, to live in a space that didn't echo with memory on every shelf. I packed light, 2 suitcases, 1 handbag, and a journal. No framed photographs, no silverware that came in sets. Just the things that were mine before anyone else had a claim on them. The train rattled gently, the rhythm of the tracks like a heartbeat I could borrow for a while. Outside, the trees gave way to fields, the fields to towns, the towns to open quiet. Each passing blur felt like an exhale. At the next stop, a woman boarded gray cardigan, kind eyes, a paperback so worn the cover had vanished. She sat across the aisle, nodded once. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. 2 hours later, I opened my journal. Not the kind for poems or confession, just a spiral notebook from the corner store. Page 1 was blank. I wrote, I am not a burden. Then, I am not a backup plan. And finally, I am not sorry. There had been too many years of shrinking, of softening my voice, trimming my edges, folding my needs to fit smaller spaces. I'd mistaken that for peace. But peace isn't silence, it's truth. And the truth was, I had been there. For every holiday, every illness, every slammed door, every meal no one thanked me for. I had shown up, I just stopped being seen. Now, they would have to live with that absence not as punishment, but as reality. When the train stopped in a small coastal town, half cottages, half fog, I stepped off without hesitation. No reservation, just a note from a woman at church. You'd like this place. It was quiet, and nobody asked questions. She'd been right. The inn was a converted farmhouse with creaky stairs and thick quilts, perched on a hill overlooking the sea. I paid for 3 nights in cash. The woman at the desk, gray braid, kind eyes, handed me a key without a second glance at my age, my hands, or my lack of luggage. Room 4, she said. Window faces the ocean. That first night, I walked along the shoreline in shoes that weren't practical, letting the tide wash over my ankles. No one called my name. No one asked where I'd been or what came next. The sky stretched endlessly open, and for the first time in years, I breathed like my lungs remembered how. Back in the room, I sat by the window and opened my journal. I wrote one more line. Leaving is not the same as disappearing. Because I hadn't disappeared. I'd simply stopped waiting to be invited back in. 3 nights became 12. When the sale closed on Thursday, I signed a month-to-month lease on a small seaside cottage, a few blocks from the inn, 1 bedroom, salt in the air, a kitchen that forgives simple meals. The innkeeper didn't mind. She gave me the off-season rate, brought me hot rolls in the morning, and asked only once if I wanted company for dinner. When I said no, she smiled and never asked again. Some mornings, I walked the beach collecting smooth stones. Some afternoons, I sat on the porch reading the same pages over and over, and some evenings I wrote. Not to anyone, just to name things. Naming had always helped. I wrote about the smell of Walter's old flannel, about Evan's crooked grin when he used to laugh without caution, about Lila's hands so much like mine, just steadier, younger. I wrote about the first time I'd felt dismissed, and the last time I'd pretended it didn't hurt. And then, I wrote about the house, how I'd loved it, and how it had stopped loving me back. That was the hardest truth to admit, because we're taught to believe that homes guard our memories like museums. But they don't. They hold them like attics, cluttered, dim, and forgotten until someone cares to open the boxes. And when no one does, you start to wonder if those memories ever mattered at all. I'd spent too long clinging to rooms that forgot my name. Now, I didn't need a room, I needed space. One morning, I walked to the post office and mailed a small envelope to Lila. Inside was a single key and a note that read, "For the day you need to start over, not because you failed, but because you refused to stay where you weren't seen." No legal jargon, no explanations. She'd find what mattered when it was time. The trust would grow slowly, silently. Just like the woman who built it, I thought steady, quiet, built to last longer than anyone expected. That afternoon, I bought myself a slice of apple pie from the diner near the pier. Sat at the counter beside a retired nurse who talked only about jigsaw puzzles and her stubborn cat. She didn't ask where I was from. She didn't care. When the sugar packet rolled too far down the counter, she slid it back to me without a word. We ate in silence, two women with nothing left to prove. Later, walking along the rocky edge of the shore, I remembered something Walter once said after one of his rare arguments with Evan, one of the few bad ones that made him leave the room. "He's got your stubborn streak," Walter muttered. "Only difference is, yours knows when to stop caring what people think." At the time, I'd taken it as an insult wrapped in a compliment. Now, I understood it was prophecy. My phone rang only once that week. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I had nothing left to explain. Let them wonder. Let them chew on the quiet. My absence was the clearest language I'd ever spoken. And deep down, I knew that none of them, not Evan, not Clara, would ever ask the only question that mattered. What made you stop waiting for us to understand? Because they already knew the answer. They just never believed I'd act on it. But I had. Not loudly, not cruelly, just completely. I didn't need their validation or their apology. I didn't need an invitation back into their well-rehearsed lives. I only needed to know that I could walk away with nothing but a suitcase, a name, and a story still my own. And I had done exactly that. That night I stood at the edge of the ocean and said thank you out loud. Not to anyone in particular, just to the wind, just to myself, for not giving up. The house sold on a Thursday. Caroline texted to confirm, funds received, deal closed, new owners move in Monday. No champagne, no tears. Just a calm, settling breath, the kind that follows years of holding it in. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. That afternoon I hiked up a narrow hill behind the inn. There wasn't much to see: wind-bent trees, scrub grass, gulls circling lazily overhead. But at the top, there was a bench facing the sea, carved with a name I didn't recognize, and a year too faded to read. I sat there a long time, not thinking, not remembering, just being. The sky above was wide and beautifully overcast. The kind of gray that morning carried was the quiet kind, the kind that keeps its promise to stay still. No threat of rain, no break of light, just enough calm to hear your own breathing. And I thought, this is peace, not reconciliation, not resolution, just space, enough to be whole again. Back at the coastal cottage, I unpacked the last of my boxes. I laid the quilt Walter's mother had made across the foot of the bed, its edges frayed but familiar, hung my robe on the back of the door, arranged the only spices I still used: cinnamon, thyme, and a small bundle of rosemary Lila had tied with ribbon. Then I lit a candle, not out of ritual but as a signal, a quiet declaration. This is mine, this space, this air, this version of my life. I sat at the table with a cup of tea and finally wrote them back. Not Clara, not Evan, but Lila. Sweetheart, the house is gone, and I am still here. That's what I want you to remember. We are not defined by the spaces we're allowed into, but by the ones we refuse to shrink ourselves inside of. One day, you might find yourself in a room where no one hears you, where your stories are dismissed, your silence mistaken for agreement. When that day comes, I want you to know, you have permission. To leave, to build new walls, to carve new doors, to go where the air doesn't require apology. I will always be proud of you, not for staying kind, but for staying awake, for knowing when kindness becomes self-erasure. The money is yours. But more than that, the freedom is. Use it wisely, use it boldly, use it with joy. And if anyone asks why you walked away, tell them you were raised by a woman who finally did the same. With love, Grandma. I sealed the letter and set it beside the teapot. Then I stepped outside into the soft, salt-heavy evening. The ocean breeze brushed my face, cool and forgiving. For the first time in decades, I carried nothing with me, no explanations, no burdens, no need to be understood. Just myself, unfolding. Like something honest left out in the open. Like a truth that no longer feared being spoken. Like a woman who left the house and never looked back. If you've made it this far, if you've walked with me through the echoes of old rooms and the weight of closed doors, then I ask you something simple. Don't just watch this story, join it. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me if you've ever stayed too long somewhere that stopped seeing you. Leave me a comment, not for validation, but for connection. Because stories like mine aren't rare. They're just quietly lived, hidden behind polite smiles and family photos that don't tell the truth. If you believe in starting over, in choosing peace over permission, then speak up for every woman who was told she needed to apologize to be loved. Tell her she doesn't. Tell me I didn't. And when your own moment comes, the one where silence feels like survival, remember this. Peace is not found in staying quiet. It's found in choosing yourself, even when it costs you comfort. Take your time. Take your space. You don't owe anyone smaller versions of yourself just to keep the peace. You deserve a life that breathes back when you do. Support those who are brave enough to start again, because sometimes walking away is the truest way to stay whole.